Accused by my 16-year-old sister, I took a 5-year probation deal to avoid 20 years in prison. 10 years later, her husband uncovered the truth. Elise and I were really close, possibly closer than most brothers and sisters, despite the 4-year age difference. We were essentially best buddies. Given what has happened, I understand that sounds strange, but it was typical back then. I was never the smartest student in school. I've always battled with grades, barely passing most classes. But I was really interested in electronics, not programming or computers, but rather pulling things apart and putting them back together. I started with antique TV remotes and radios that I found at yard sales. By the time I was 16, I had a whole setup in my room, a soldering iron, multimeters, and crates full of circuit boards and cables. My parents thought it was strange, especially because I would spend hours inside with the door locked. Yes, that is important later. But Elise got it. She was 10 years old when I first became serious about it, and she would sit in my room for hours watching me work. She'd ask me questions about what each part worked, why I was connecting specific cables, and so on. She'd occasionally help me organize my pieces or hold them while I soldered. It was our thing, you understand. However, our parents did play favorites. Elise was the ideal student, straight A's, gymnastics team, student council, the complete package. Meanwhile, I was barely passing classes and spent all of my time either in my room with electronics or at the skate park. But Elise always had my back. For example, I was caught smoking behind the gym once during my junior year. Instead of suspending me, Elise made up a tale about how I was only holding the cigarette for someone else who had run away. She even cried to the principal about how I was trying to change my life and how a suspension would ruin it all. The principal completely bought it. She also helped me with homework. She was far better at explaining things than my teachers. She'd lay down arithmetic issues in a way that made sense to me, probably the only reason I finished high school, to be honest. I also looked out for her. As the big brother, I was quite protective. Looking back, I wonder whether I was being overly protective. Any guy who was interested in her had to deal with me first. I wasn't trying to be rude about it. I just didn't want some random person messing with my little sister. Elise never judged me for getting into trouble, going out late, or hanging around with the wrong crowd. She would cover for me with our parents and make excuses when I skipped curfew. When I came home at 3 a.m., she was waiting for me on the porch, just to make sure I arrived safely. Looking back, perhaps we were too close. Perhaps this is why people were so willing to trust what she stated subsequently. However, it seemed natural at the time. She was my sister, greatest friend, and the one person who truly understood me. Our parents tried to get me interested in normal things. They'd sign me up for sports teams and after-school groups, but I'd always return to my electronic devices. They thought I was wasting my time, but Elise would defend me. "He's good at it," she would remark. "Let him do what he loves." That's the Elise I try to remember, the little sister who believed in me even when no one else did. She was the one who would bring me snacks while I worked on projects, who would defend me in front of our parents, and who trusted me enough to confide in me about her issues. This is harder to write than I anticipated. When things started to fall apart, I was 18, having just graduated from high school. Elise was 16 years old and started to attract the attention of males at school. Being the overprotective brother that I was, I did what any big brother would do, scared them away. I wasn't beating anyone up. I simply wanted them to know I was watching. There was one guy, John, who was especially persistent, a senior citizen driving a nice car that his folks had bought him. Typical affluent kid behavior. I found him attempting to persuade Elise to skip class with him one day. I definitely shouldn't have thrown him against his car, but he was 18, and he was attempting to convince my 16-year-old sister to skip school. What brother wouldn't be pissed? That's when the rumors began. At first it was just whispers. People at Elise's school commenting on how strange it was that I was so protective. Then things got worse. Someone began to explain. The reason I didn't want other guys near Elise was because I wanted her for myself. I remember the exact moment when I sensed something was seriously wrong. It was Tuesday after school. Normally, Elise would come to my room and hang out while I worked on my projects, but this time she went directly to her room. I knocked on her door to check on her, and she instructed me to go. Later that night, I discovered her in the kitchen, crying. When I attempted to hug her, as I always did when she was angry, she recoiled. Actually flinched away from me. That had never occurred before. She mumbled something about being weary and returned to her room. The next few days were strange. She stopped going to my room and spoke to me at all. Really, I assumed she was simply going through a teenage phase or something. I should have known better. Then one morning, I was working on an antique radio I had unearthed when I heard someone knocking on our front door. Not just any knocking, but the loud, official type that makes your stomach drop. 2 cops and a woman in a suit were standing there. When my father opened the door, they asked to talk with him quietly first. I could hear them conversing in the kitchen, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Then my father summoned me down. I'll never forget the expression on his face, like if he were looking at a stranger. The lady in the suit presented herself as a representative from Child Protective Services, CPS, and stated that they needed to ask me some questions concerning my relationship with Elise. Elise had gone to her guidance counselor and told them that I had been inappropriately touching her. She said it was why I was always in my room with the door locked, that I forced her to come in, and, well, you can figure out the rest. She told them I'd threatened to hurt her if she told anyone, and she said, that's why I was so aggressive with guys who showed interest in her. She even said, I used the electronic stuff as a cover, that the wires and zip ties in my room were for other things. My father didn't question anything. He just stood there nodding as they spoke, as if everything made sense to him. All those hours in my room, the shut door, and his protectiveness of Elise piled up to something nasty in his thoughts. I attempted to explain, showing them my projects, the half-repaired radio on my desk, the crates of circuit boards and obsolete electronics. I tried to explain how Elise used to sit and watch me work, and how she would help me organize bits, but they had already made up their minds. The CPS officer kept asking leading questions, such as, did you make Elise feel special by allowing her to help you? Did you tell her she was different from the other girls? Everything I said only made it sound worse. When they questioned about the time I pushed John, Elise had twisted it as well. She claimed I was envious because she was starting to enjoy other males, and that I couldn't take her maturing and having regular relationships since it would mean losing control over her. What is the worst part? She had this big spiel about how I had become more aggressive recently since she was pulling away. I told her that she was betraying me by talking to other guys. None of it was true, but the way she described it made me nearly believe it. And then I lost it, right in front of everyone. Elise, what the hell are you saying? My voice cracked. Not because I was angry, but because I couldn't believe it. She would not look at me. Elise, look at me. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, arms curled about herself as if she were a delicate tiny thing in need of protection. That tiny deed only made me furious. You know this isn't true. You know it. I turned to our father, desperate. Dad, come on, you know me. I would never. His voice was low and steady, but his expression, I had never seen him stare at me like that before. Not dissatisfied, not angry, simply finished. You don't even want to hear me out. I took a step closer, but he raised his hand as if I were a menace. Elise flinched. She flinched. That was it. That's when I knew. You can't seriously believe this. My voice lowered. I immediately lost all of my fighting spirit. I looked at Elise again. Really stared at her. She still refused to meet my gaze. I muttered, "Why are you doing this?" She eventually looked up. For a brief minute, it appeared that she was about to say something, perhaps even retract her statements. But then she looked at Dad, the CPS lady, and the cop standing in our living room. And that's when she doubled down, her eyes welling with tears. She took a nervous breath and muttered, "I'm sorry, Eric." And suddenly I understood. She was not going to return it since it was too late. She was in too deep, and she was afraid of the consequences. I laughed. Actually, I laughed. "Wow," I said. "You're really doing this. You're actually doing this." Elise tightened her arms about herself. I just couldn't keep it in anymore. Dad clenched his jaw. "Get your things. We're going to the station." And that was all. There is no trial, no evidence, and no serious questions. My father drove me to the police station in silence, as if I were already guilty, a stranger, and no longer his son. On the way to the police station, all I could think about was how they made everything fit. The lonely older brother who spent his entire day alone in his room. The strange pastime involving all of the tools and wires. Aggressive protectiveness. A close connection that suddenly deteriorated. They saw precisely what they wanted to see. The police station interview room looked just like one from a movie. They left me sitting there for what seemed like hours before 2 detectives arrived. Rivers, the male investigator, portrayed the good cop by saying things like, "We just want to understand what happened, Eric. Help us help you." The female detective, I can't recall her name, sat there taking notes and giving me dirty glances. Rivers started looking into my electronics hobby. "Tell me about the things you build," he inquired, attempting to sound interested. So I explained how to repair antique radios, create rudimentary circuits, and other basic concepts. "And Elise would help you with these projects?" "Yeah," I replied. "She'd organize parts, hold stuff while I soldered. She liked learning about it." The female detective cut in. "So you'd have her alone in your room, door locked, handling your equipment?" That's when I realized how they were distorting everything. Everything usual now sounded weird. They kept pushing on the shut door. "I locked it because I had expensive tools," I attempted to explain. "Dad would borrow stuff and not put it back." "Or maybe," Rivers replied, his voice growing harsher, "you locked it for other reasons." They had an entire file of evidence and statements about how I began molesting her when she was 12. Right moment she became intrigued. In my projects, how I used electronics to isolate her, made her feel special by teaching her information that no one else knew. "That's insane," I replied. "She's my sister. I was teaching her because she was interested." The female detective leaned forwards. "Interested in electronics? Or afraid of what would happen if she wasn't?" Then they mentioned the John incident. However, in their version, I attacked him because he was stealing Elise away from me. They had testimonies from other students at school about how protective I was and how I scared away any person who approached her. Rivers dug out some images of my room from that morning. They had made it look like a torture cell. Close-ups of my tools, cables, and the zip ties I used for cable management. Even my project notes appeared menacing in the photographs. "Your father says you'd spend hours alone with Elise in this room," Rivers quipped. "Want to tell us what really happened there?" I lost it. They started ranting about how they were making natural brother-sister interactions sound obscene. That was a bad move. Rivers only nodded as if I'd confirmed something. "Classic defensive reaction," he told his partner. They then brought up my academics, lack of friends, and the hours I spent alone in my room. They created a complete profile of an isolated, unstable man, fascinated with his sister. They were doing more than just exploring. They were building a case. And the more I denied it, the guiltier I seemed. My lawyer, if you can call her that, scarcely fought back. "We need to consider a plea deal," she said, as if that were my only alternative. "If this goes to trial, you could be facing 20 years in prison." After hours of this, Rivers eventually said, "Look, Eric, here's the deal. We have enough for charges, serious charges. But if you work with us, admit what happened, and show remorse, we can help you." "I didn't do anything wrong," I repeated, maybe for the 100th time. "Then explain why Elsa would make this up." I could not, because it did not make sense. My sister, whom I had safeguarded and cared for, used to wait up until I arrived home safely. Why would she do that? The following section is somewhat blurry. There were talks with attorneys. My parents had hired one for Elise, but they told me I needed to get my own. The public lawyer they assigned me was only out of law school and was already persuaded I was guilty. She explained my alternatives. I could fight it, but she made it apparent that victory was unlikely. "Juries believe victims," she stated plainly, and Elise is young, emotional, and convincing. She outlined the reality. If I went to trial, I faced up to 20 years in prison. The plea settlement was lenient, 5 years probation, a lifelong registry, and no jail time. "If you take this to trial and lose," warns the attorney, "you won't get another chance." My own parents were not even on my side. Dad simply shook his head. "Don't put your sister through a trial," he told her. "Just take the deal." "But I'm innocent," I replied. "They all say that," she said, not looking up from her papers. "They have your sister's testimony, documentation of behavioral changes, witness statements about your possessive behavior. No jury will believe you over a traumatized 16-year-old girl." My father came to see me once before I accepted the agreement. I haven't seen him since he left me off at the station. I hoped he'd finally see the truth. Instead, he said, "Just admit what you did, Eric. Don't make your sister go through a trial." "Dad, please," I implored. "You know me. You know I'd never—" He shut me off. "I thought I knew you. Guess I didn't." That was my final real chat with my father. 2 days later, I accepted the arrangement and pleaded no contest to sexual abuse on a minor. I received 5 years probation and a lifetime on the registry. Some of you may wonder why I would plead if I were innocent. The truth is, they break you. They pervert every routine aspect of your existence until you can no longer trust your own memories. And when everyone, including your family, the cops, and your own lawyer, believes you're guilty, you begin to wonder if fighting is useless. Being on the list has an unexpected negative impact on your life. Everyone discusses the big issues. Can't live near schools, can't get certain jobs, etc. But it's the little things that truly affect you. After everything, the lady at the first place I wanted to rent was eager for me to sign the lease. Then she completed the background check. I can vividly remember her expression when she saw what came up. She pulled away from me, as if I was about to assault her right there in her office. "I'm sorry," she replied. "I have grandchildren who visit. I'm sure you understand." That became my life. People apologize while treating me like a monster. Finding a job was a nightmare. Most places would not even consider my application if they realized I had to check that option. The few interviews I had always ended in the same way. "We'll call you." They never did. Finally, I found Mike, who owned a small manufacturing business. He recruited people that others wouldn't, ex-convicts, addicts trying to get clean, and folks like me. The pay was terrible, and the labor was difficult, but at least it was something. "Look," Mike told me on my first day, "I don't care what you did. Just show up on time and do your job." I worked there for nearly 2 years. Then someone found out about me and began causing difficulties, telling other workers they shouldn't have to deal with someone like me because I was hazardous. Mike fought to defend me, but he ultimately had to let me go. "Can't risk losing my whole workforce," he told me. At the very least, he paid me substantial severance pay. I lost my flat shortly after that. I ended up living in my car for a spell. A Planet Fitness membership became my best buddy, costing $10 a month for a place to shower and use the restroom. I'd sleep in the 24-hour Walmart parking lots. If you did not cause any trouble, security would usually leave you alone. However, the worst part was not even the practical stuff. It was watching life go on without me via mutual friends on Facebook, before they blocked me. I witnessed Elise graduate from high school with honors, attend college on a full scholarship, and meet this wealthy guy, Billy, at a campus function. Meanwhile, I was eating cold ravioli from a can in my car, attempting to figure out where I could park overnight without being hassled by cops. I made the mistake of attempting to date once. I met Sarah at one of my jobs. She was friendly and didn't ask too many questions about my background. We went out several times. Everything was going nicely. Then she inquired why I always had to look up the address of wherever we were going. I decided. To be honest, I told her about the registration needed and how I needed to be careful where I went. I tried to convey that I was innocent and that the accusation was unfounded. She explained that she needed time to think. The following day, her brother and 2 of his pals showed up at my workplace. I had to abandon that job as well. Following that, I began to frequent this small library branch. The librarian there seemed to understand my dilemma, but she never said anything. She'd simply place things she thought I'd want on the returns cart. A lot of technical manuals and electronics books. I guess she observed what I generally read. One day, she found me looking at online courses, sat down, and assisted me in finding free ones to take. "Education is everyone's right," she stated. She was the first person in years to treat me with dignity. I began learning about cryptocurrency through those courses. I figured that was something I could do without having my background checked. It turned out I had an aptitude for grasping the technical side of things. I made a little money here and there from trading. But you know what really screwed me up? Seeing comments on Elise's social media, all these people raving about how brave she was, how fantastic it was that she was able to overcome her trauma and achieve success. She even authored a survivor-themed piece for her campus paper. People referred to her as an inspiration. Meanwhile, I was barely surviving. Isn't it funny how that works? I considered trying to clear my name, but who would believe me? Elise was a great, accomplished college student. I was just a creep living in his car. The system does not care about folks like me. That's how I spent most of my 20s. Changing jobs and locations. Never stayed any place long enough for folks to learn about me. Never make friends because what's the point if they'll depart as soon as they find out? Some nights, I'd lie in my car, scrolling through old family photos on my phone. Pictures of me and Elise when we were kids, trying to figure out what went wrong and what I could have done differently. That is the thing with being on the list. It does not simply take away your freedom. It erases your past, your future, and your entire identity. You stop being a person and instead become a label. But then everything changed. It was just a regular Tuesday. I was at work. I had obtained another factory job that was better than the last one when I received this email from a private investigator. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something compelled me to read it. The private investigator stated that he was hired by Elise's husband, Billy, to investigate her background. Billy began to investigate because she had been acting strangely recently. The PI had discovered flaws in her story about me and wanted to talk. I dismissed it at first. I've had enough people messing with my life already. But then he gave me another email with confirmation that he was legitimate, court records, case files, and other information I had never seen before. We met in a diner just outside of town. The PI, let's call him Frank, had a big packet of paperwork. "Your sister's story is falling apart," he remarked, scattering papers across the table. "Been doing this job 30 years, never seen someone mess up their own lie this bad." It turned out that Elise had been sloppy, very sloppy. The time frame she provided for when events allegedly occurred did not match school records. The witness accounts from her pals were different each time she presented the event. But what really surprised me was this. Remember John, the senior who was constantly hitting on her? It turned out he wasn't just any man scouting around. She was covertly dating him. And not only that, she was found in his car, doing things she wasn't supposed to do. She was convinced I would tell our parents about it. Maybe because she knew I'd always been protective, or maybe out of sheer dread. In any case, she needed a distraction, something large and stunning enough to ensure that no one thought about John. So she made up the allegations, knowing that once they were spoken, nothing else would matter. Frank had copies of texts between Elise and her pals from that time, which she thought had been destroyed. In those, she actually planned everything. We discussed how she needed a nuclear option to keep me quiet. She didn't expect it to go as far as it did, Frank told me. Reading these messages, it seems like she thought they'd just send you away to live with relatives. Or something. When your dad went full scorched earth, she was too scared to take it back. I just sat there, reading everything, seeing verification of what I'd already understood. Frank continued talking. "Billy hired me because she's been acting strange lately, drinking too much, getting paranoid. He found her crying over old family photos one night. When he asked about you, she completely shut down. That's when he called me." Frank then handed out one final document. Elise's signed confession. Billy confronted her with all of the proof, and she broke down and told him everything. "I need you to understand something," Frank stated. "This isn't going to magically fix everything. The legal system doesn't like admitting it made a mistake. But it's a start." He left me with copies of everything. I spent the entire night reading through it all, from the text where she plotted it, to the confession where she eventually revealed the truth. I even discovered some posts she made on a site about how to make abuse charges more credible. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. This time, I got a real one, not some overworked public lawyer who had already determined I was guilty. We sought post-conviction relief based on fresh evidence. My lawyer argued Elise's confession, together with the anomalies Frank discovered, was sufficient to overturn my conviction and take me from the registry. After months of proceedings, a court ruled in my favor. My record was wiped clean. I should have been relieved. I should have felt something. But all I could think about was how long it had taken and how much I'd sacrificed in the process. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. There was no return address, but I knew who sent it before I opened it. My parents. First contact in 10 years. My hands shook as I ripped it open, not from exhilaration, but from complete disbelief. Inside was a letter written in my father's rigid, impersonal handwriting. They wanted to meet. Elise claimed she had finally come clean. Well, partially. She spun a watered-down version of the facts, portraying herself as a terrified young girl who made a terrible mistake. There was no mention of the calculated lies or the years of pain she subjected me to. However, it appears that this was enough for them to finally accept I was innocent. The envelope included a check for $50,000, which they most likely considered generous. As if it could somehow undo a decade of being treated as a monster. It's as if it could buy back my stolen years, respect, and existence. I held it up to the light for a second before laughing. Nothing had changed. They still believed that problems could be fixed with a price tag. Money was not what I needed. I needed to hear the truth from someone else. So I took Frank's number and called him. My hands shook when I finally dialed. He responded after a few rings, his voice apprehensive. "Hello. Billy, this is Eric." After a long wait, they cautiously said, "Eric. Who?" I took a moment to recover from the pain before responding. "Elise's brother." Silence. Then a low, unfunny chuckle. That's funny, because Elise never mentioned having a brother. Never mentioned any family, actually. I choked down the mounting wrath in my chest. Yeah, that tracks. Can't have the skeletons in her closet out running their mouths, right? Billy breathed sharply. Jesus, I knew she was hiding things, but this… I've been married to this woman for years, had a kid with her, and I didn't even know she had a brother. Not one she didn't completely destroy first, I stated bluntly. There was another delay before he muttered, "Unbelievable." His voice had the hard edge of someone recognizing how profoundly they'd been manipulated. Then he groaned and spoke again, his voice forceful, final. "I'm filing for divorce." I didn't say anything at first, allowing the weight of his words to rest between us. I finally nodded, despite the fact that he could not see me. "Good," I said. "You deserve better." I hung up after that. There's no point saying anything else. But as I put down my phone, a strange sense of relief came over me. Then I discovered the social media posts. Elise erased all of her accounts, but not before issuing a lengthy explanation about how she remembered things incorrectly as a teenager. She made herself sound like a victim, a poor, bewildered girl who made a mistake, now fearlessly revealing the truth. Her beautiful life began to fall apart after that. Billy has filed for divorce. The school where she worked, yes, she became a teacher, imagine that, requested her resignation. It turns out they dislike having professors who have admitted to creating false abuse complaints. I later learned that Billy had full custody of their child. Elise's confession was used as proof of her instability. She tried to oppose it, but Frank's inquiry had discovered other lies. There are a lot of them. What is the genuine truth? She had lied about everything for years. Not only about myself. She also made up stories concerning other people. When things didn't go her way, she would accuse guys of various things. Some questioned why she eventually confessed. According to Frank, my parents had begun to notice things. Elise had been acting erratic for months, vanishing for hours without explanation, having random outbursts about nothing, and drinking excessively at family events. The final straw came when she slipped up during a heated confrontation with my mother. She blurted out something about how Eric would not have suffered had Dad not overreacted. My mother froze and pressed her for details. Elise attempted to backtrack, but it was too late. Doubt had already been planted. My father, ever the controlling figure, began digging. He contacted people from Elise's history, including her former high school friends. And with that, the holes in her story began to appear. Elise was already in a downward spiral, attempting to stitch together a falsehood that was rapidly unraveling. So when Billy presented her with the evidence, the texts, the contradictions, the proof she thought was long gone, she broke down. And then my phone rang. It was my mom. Her speech was weak, as if she had been crying for several hours. "Eric, please, we need to talk." I almost hung up right there, but something about her tone kept me on the line. She began talking about Elise and how she had finally told them her side of the story. She recognized she had made mistakes, but she was young, afraid, and confused. "She's not the same person anymore," my mother asserted. "She's broken, Eric. She cries every day. She knows she ruined your life and she can barely live with herself." Then they actually asked, "Can't you just forgive her?" This made my blood boil. Forgive? As if she had borrowed and smashed my automobile. As if she had taken money from me. As if she hadn't taken away my entire existence, leaving me in ruins while she had to move on and play the victim for years. "You don't understand," my mother continued. "She's suffering now too." That was when I decided to meet them. Not intended for closure. Not to repair a shattered family bond. I wanted them to understand exactly what they did to me. "Fine," I said. "Let's meet." But I already knew how things were going to finish. We met in a restaurant midway between our cities. Mom started crying the moment she saw me. Dad simply sat there, looking old and broken. Perhaps having your golden child turn out to be a liar does that to you. Mom attempted to hug me. I took a step back. "Let's just sit down," I said. They had prepared a speech about how sorry they were, how they should have trusted me, and how they wanted to rebuild our family. Dad even took out his checkbook again. Like pouring money at it will solve everything. "Put that away," I instructed him. "I didn't come here for your money." Mom continued saying things like this. We were just trying to protect your sister, and we did what we thought was right at the time, making excuses, as always. I let them talk to themselves. Then I took out the packet Frank handed me and began reading Elise's texts aloud, the ones where she plotted the entire affair. I watched their faces as they understood how severely their precious daughter had cheated them. She was scared. Mom attempted to justify her. She was just a child. I was barely an adult, I said. Where was my protection? Where was my benefit of the doubt? Dad tried again. We know we messed up. We want to make it right. Make it right, I laughed. You want to make it right? Can you give me back my 20s? Can you undo the registry, the jobs I lost, the people who treated me like garbage? They just sat there, running out of reasons. I told them everything, about living in my van, taking showers at Planet Fitness, and eating cold meals since I couldn't afford a house with a kitchen. I showed them my wrist scars from my lowest point. Mom vomited in the restaurant bathroom. For the first time in years, my parents were forced to confront the truth. The undeniable indication that they had discarded their own son without hesitation, that their golden child was anything but golden. I saw them sit in horrified silence, their entire world collapsing in real time. You did this, I said in a firm voice. You let it happen. My father appeared to want to dispute, to justify himself. For once he didn't. He simply gazed at the table, jaw clenched. Mom, on the other hand, continued to try. Eric, we were just trying to protect her. We thought we were doing the right thing. I leaned back and breathed slowly. You know what the worst part is? I get that. I do. If I actually was some kind of monster, you would have been doing what any decent parent should do. But you never even gave me a chance. Not once. You decided I was guilty because it was easier than questioning Elise, and you let me rot for it. Tears ran down her face. We were wrong, she muttered. We were so wrong. I let that sink in for a moment. Because, yes, they were wrong. They were more than wrong. But nothing they said could possibly restore what I had lost. I spent 10 years of my life as nothing more than a label. Mom stretched across the table, her hands trembling. Please, Eric, we can't change the past, but we're still your parents. Can we at least try to fix this? I drew my hand away before she could touch me. Fix it, I sneered. Tell me, Mom, how exactly do you fix 10 years? She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Dad finally spoke. You have every right to hate us, he said in a hoarse old voice. But we're still your family. I shake my head. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for. A heavy stillness fell between us. They had expected rage, possibly even screams, but I was beyond all of it. I did not need to yell. They were drowning in their own shame without me saying anything. Then Mom played her final card. Elise is suffering too, Eric. I stared at her. Of course she would say so. She lost everything, she added. Her marriage, her career, her friends. She deserved to, I said, my voice cold. Mom recoiled like I'd smacked her. She made a choice, I murmured, my gaze fixed on them both. She lied, and I paid the consequences. But you? I glanced squarely at my father, who shuddered under my gaze. You made a choice too. You believed her without a second thought. You let them take me without hesitation. Dad closed his eyes for a time, as if to filter out the truth. Mom's voice scarcely rose beyond a whisper. She's not the same person anymore. I gave a dry chuckle. Neither am I. Wasn't that the actual tragedy? The boy they had known, the one who spent hours in his room fixing radios and would go to any length for his younger sister, was no longer there. They had buried him a decade before, when they let the cops take me away. I grabbed the check that my father had placed on the table earlier. $50,000. An amount they most likely made up, believing that money might undo their actions. I stared at it for a second before ripping it in half. I don't need your money, I replied. I don't need anything from you. Mom began sobbing. Dad said nothing. He just sat there like a guy who realized he had lost something he could never get back. I stood up. You made your choice, I remarked calmly. Now you get to live with it. I walked away without looking back. I felt nothing when I left that eatery. There was no sense of accomplishment, no relief from the weight on my shoulders, just nothing. And perhaps that was the true closure. A few weeks later, I received a letter through the mail. There was no return address, but I knew who sent it before I opened it. It came from Elise. I glanced at the mail for a long time before I opened it. The letter within was short. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I apologize. That was it. No excuses. There's no explanation, just that. I held it for a second before setting it down. I never wrote back. Yes, life did not magically become perfect after that. The damage had been done, and I would always bear the scars of those 10 years. But I was finally free. Truly free. With my record wiped, I could finally live free of the burden of my past. I went to a new city, began over, and established my electronics repair business from the ground up. And I've never looked back. My parents, along with everything else, became ghosts of a life I'd left behind. Perhaps one day I'll think of them and feel something. But at the moment, I was finally living my life on my own terms.